Carolina Duke is always an instant classic, but Saturday's matchup is for all, or in Duke's case, a share of the ACC marbles. Can USC sweep the series and secure an outright conference title?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your co-hosts. I'm Andy Patton. He is Isaac Shade. Today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. Folks, these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster, and they do it for free. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. All right, folks, coming at you. We are recording this show on Thursday, early afternoon. So there's a few games on Thursday night we're not going to be able to cover tonight. We do have our jinx of the week, as we typically do. I got a feeling, I talked about this on Thursday's episode, that UCLA might be able to pull off a stunner and beat Arizona. So that's going to be our jinx. We're calling UCLA winning that, or I guess we're calling Arizona winning that.
Yeah, that's right.
If we're jinxing them for UCLA to pull off the upset. But we have an incredible amount of basketball action to talk about this weekend. For most conferences, the final weekend of the regular season. I think for every conference that isn't already done, as we get into the conference tournament season, some aspirations to clinch regular season titles. We got 3 ranked on ranked games to talk about. We got a ton of other ranked teams in action to get to in the second segment. We'll close out the show talking about the bubble and what teams might be playing their final games with bubble aspirations. We're going to get to all of that. But Isaac, let's start in the ACC with the biggest rivalry in college sports. Duke, Carolina. North Carolina is on the road playing Duke in at the Cameron Indoor Stadium, 6:30 Eastern time, Saturday on ESPN. It's pretty simple. Carolina wins, they clinch the ACC outright. If Duke wins, they grab a share. It goes into some tiebreaker scenarios. This is for all of the marbles. Carolina won the first matchup between these two teams, but now they got to go on the road. Cameron Crazies, it's going to be absolutely nuts in that building on Saturday. Isaac, what are you looking forward to? What are you looking at with this matchup coming up?
Man, as you said, everything's on the line here. It feels like this is what the ACC is just always supposed to be, Andy. This is what's so good for our sport when it's bigger than just bragging rights, when there's legit conference and NCAA tournament implications on the line with this matchup. As you said, Carolina won the first one. This will be the first time the regular season has closed at Cameron in the rivalry since Coach K's last regular season home game. We remember what happened there. And so big stuff on the line. You and I talked about it earlier this week, but I think one of the big things we're watching for is, can Duke figure out some things on how to defend the interior so that Armando Bacot doesn't kind of go off like he did in round one and like DJ Burns did against Duke earlier in the week. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Coach Shire throw some wrinkles defensively at Armando Bacot, try to mess him up. We're always watching. And by the way, as part of that, Sean Stewart has been coming along for Duke. I think that'll be a critical thing. We know that Caleb Foster is out in the backcourt, so that probably means more minutes for Jeremy Roach and Tyrese Proctor, which is not a bad thing for Duke in any way, right? And so we wait to see if the season series can be evened up with hopefully a rubber match in the ACC tournament. I love it when that happens. So Andy, should be an electric game on Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you talk about the front court matchup, and I think that's going to be critical. But this game's got so many talented guards playing in it as well. RJ Davis, Cormac Ryan, if he can have a big game for North Carolina, that's massive. If he can space the floor, shoot well from deep, that puts some more pressure on Duke's defense. There's a ton of excitement with this game, and I can't wait to sit down and watch this one. I think it's going to be. Is it ever a bad game? It's very rare for this to be a bad game, but with the stakes as high as they are for this one, it's going to be an incredible contest.
Absolutely, it is, Andy. And that's not the only Power 6 conference with outright regular season championships on the line. The Big 12 is the same. Number 14, Kansas at number 1, Houston, Saturday at 4 on ESPN. Andy, thanks to Iowa State's really nice comeback win at home against BYU on Wednesday night, Houston has not yet clinched the outright. Similar to North Carolina, Houston has clinched a share, but a Houston win, they're the outright champions, or a Houston loss and an Iowa State win at K-State creates a tie. So really interested to see what happens. And Andy, before we even talk about the game, let's just stop and recognize what a massive accomplishment this is for Houston. I think people just assumed, because of how good they've been, that they would just come on over from the American Conference and everything would be hunky-dory. But coming into this conference that most people perceive as the best conference in all of D1, doing what they've done, we had a couple questions right at the beginning of conference play as they lost those 2 road games. But here they are, Arsenal-less, by the way. And in the AAC, where you can kind of rest in a couple of games, there is not that in the Big 12. What Kelvin Sampson's team has done, Andy, is nothing short of incredible this season. Congrats to them. Andy, what do you think?
It's incredible. I mean, you're absolutely right. This is a team that comes over from a mid-major conference, a good mid-major conference, but they take a big step into the Big 12. They lost their senior leader in Marcus Sasser to graduation. They lost their stud freshman, Jarris Walker, to the NBA. They lose Terrence Arsenault early in the season with the season-ending injury. Yes, they acquire LJ Cryer from Baylor, and that was a huge addition for them. Jamal Shedd's obviously fantastic. But for this team to have bulldozed their way through the Big 12 after those first 2 losses. They lost at Iowa State on the road, but Iowa State, is the second best team in the conference. They lost at TCU. That's a tough place to play. And here they are rattling off bunches and bunches of wins after that. I think regardless of whether they outright win this conference or tie with Iowa State, which I think is certainly plausible, Kansas is an incredibly good team. They have struggled on the road, and Houston has a chance to pick up a big win over Kansas and lock it up. But even if they don't do that, if they share this title with Iowa State, honestly, it's a huge accomplishment for both programs.
Yes.
Iowa State, TJ Otzelberger, for them to be in this spot. I mean, this team was 0-18 in the conference, 4 years ago? Is that when it was? It is crazy to think about the growth that this program has taken. For Houston and Iowa State, I think a lot of people will look at the Big 12 and the teams at the top and will be critical of Kansas, or they'll be critical of Baylor, which is a little unfair. Baylor's been very good this year, or they'll critical of Texas or whomever, as opposed to just acknowledging that Houston and Iowa State had incredible, amazing seasons. And the fact that they're at the top of the standings has nothing to do with the other programs. It has all to do with how great those 2 teams are. Having said that, Kansas obviously having a rough year. They're really going to want to go into Houston, pick up a road win here, carry some momentum into the Big 12 tournament.
Andy, everything you just said there is so perfect, because if you had told us preseason, hey, there's 2 teams coming into the last weekend of the regular season with aspirations for Big 12 title championship prediction or opportunities, we would have probably said it was 2 of those 3 schools that you just named, Baylor, Texas, and Kansas. And it is not.
Yep.
And I think it's so important what you just said. Let's not take anything away from Houston or Iowa State, man. They have done this and they have claimed it, and congrats to both of those programs. That said, I cannot wait to see what happens in Houston on Saturday. And that is going to be an insane environment. And that takes us to the third ranked on ranked matchup on Saturday. And Andy, as crazy as it is to say, this is the one with the least on the line in terms of regular season conference implications. 15 Kentucky at 4 Tennessee. It's 4 p.m. on CBS on Saturday. And Andy, the reason I just said what I did is because the way Tennessee has handled this 4-game closing gauntlet thus far has rendered this game a moot point, or as Joey Tribbiani would say, a moo point from an SEC standpoint, because of what they've done. They won at home against Auburn. They won at Alabama. They won at South Carolina. And so now, from Tennessee's vantage point, this game only matters for NCAA tournament seeding purposes and bragging rights. I don't care what Joe Lunardi has been saying about Arizona having the inside track for the 1 seed. To me, Andy, tell me if I'm wrong, Tennessee is the team that has the inside track to the 4th number 1 seed.
Yeah, I think it's Tennessee at this point. I mean, if they lose to Kentucky, if they lose their first game in the SEC tournament, which will be, they'll get that double bye. It'll be probably a quad 1 loss, maybe a quad 2 loss. I still think Tennessee's the 4th 1 seed, and that's the worst case scenario for the Vols at this point. Now, obviously, we'll see what Arizona does. We'll see what Iowa State does if they, clinch a share of the Big 12 title and then win the Big 12 championship. That could potentially push them ahead of Tennessee, maybe. But I think Tennessee's ahead of Arizona right now. I think they're ahead of Ohio. Excuse me. I think they're ahead of Iowa State, also Ohio State.
Way ahead of Ohio State.
And I think they're ahead of the ACC schools. So I think that's a really fascinating kind of spot of whether Tennessee will end up getting that final 1 seed. But this game matters more for Kentucky. in a huge way. Kentucky right now is in a 4-way tie in second place in the SEC. Isaac, a 4-way tie. One of the teams that's tied for second today and on Friday and on Saturday morning is going to end up finishing 5th. Do you know what 5th place in the SEC means? It means you don't get a double bye. You got to play an extra game. The fact that somebody on Friday is going to be in second place on Friday and is going to not even get a double bye when the top 4 seeds get one is crazy. But that is the reality of how close the SEC has been. Of course, Tennessee's at the top. Kentucky is tied with Auburn. They are tied with South Carolina. They are tied with Florida. All of those teams have a 12-5 record. Tiebreakers in the SEC, it's kind of complicated, but effectively what you need to know is this. If all of those teams remain tied, South Carolina is the winner. They have the best record against the rest of those teams, which is the first tiebreaker in the SEC. So if all of these teams were to win their next games, Auburn would actually be the team that finishes 5th in the SEC and does not get that double bye because they finished 1 and 2 against that particular group of teams. Now, the matchups, obviously we know Kentucky is on the road at Tennessee. That is clearly the toughest game any of these teams are playing. Georgia is going at Auburn, so Auburn has a home game against the Bulldogs. Florida is on the road, but they're playing Vanderbilt. That's a pretty easy draw. South Carolina is on the road at Mississippi State. Not super easy, but certainly not the same as going to Knoxville to take on the Vols. So this is a really compelling SEC Saturday. Watch as many of the SEC games as you can, folks, because it is going to be really fun to see how this thing shakes out, whether Kentucky can pick up a huge win here. Because if Kentucky loses to Tennessee, which is totally plausible, and both Florida and Auburn, again, playing Vanderbilt and Georgia, if both of them win, all of a sudden Kentucky finishes 5th. They don't get that double bye. Craziness in the SEC.
I don't think Big Blue Nation would be too thrilled with that result. Andy, folks, and by the way, do not think that Tennessee has nothing to play for here. They want that 4th 1 seed, and they're going to go after it and get it. That game is going to be phenomenal. Andy, we just talked about 6 of the ranked teams. 9 more of them are headed on the road in our final ranked on the road conversation of the regular season. Are they going to combine to finish over 500? We'll talk about that in just a second. Right after I tell you that this episode is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV, which is your destination for sports. From live games to highlights and in-depth analysis, Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you just plug into your existing TV to provide access to millions of movies and TV episodes. Andy and I both use Fire TV sticks legitimately in our houses. Every TV in the Shade household, which we affectionately call Shady Acres, has a Fire stick plugged into it. I love the layout. I love the user experience. I love the little handy dandy remote that has buttons that take me directly to Disney Plus and Prime and Hulu and Netflix. It's awesome. Plus, Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, including all of us here at the Locked On Network. That's all for free. Beyond that, these have great news and entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking videos as well. So check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't done so, you should. Trust both of us on that. To learn more, visit amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. Andy, it's the final weekend of the regular season. As you said earlier, we've got 22 of the AP Top 25 teams in action combined between Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. The only 3 that aren't are Gonzaga and St. Mary's, who are already done with the regular season, gearing up for the West Coast Conference semis on Monday. And then Wazoo, who plays on Thursday night. By the time you are listening to or watching this, folks, you already know that result. The other 22 are all in action. So, Andy, here's the 9 that are on the road, and then you take this where you want. We got Iowa State at Kansas State, 2 o'clock Saturday on ESPN2. Creighton at Villanova, 2:30 Saturday on Fox. Number 17, South Carolina at Mississippi State, 2:30 on Saturday, SEC Network. 24, South Florida at Tulsa, 3 o'clock on Saturday on ESPN+. Number 8, Marquette at Xavier, 5 o'clock Eastern Saturday on Fox. Number 11, Baylor at Texas Tech, 6 Eastern on Saturday, ESPN2. Number 2, UConn at Providence, 8 o'clock Saturday on Fox. Number 5, Arizona at USC, 10 o'clock Saturday on ESPN. And number 12, Illinois at Iowa, 7 o'clock Sunday on FS1. Andy, What really sticks out to you from that ridiculous group of 9 games?
Well, we already kind of talked a little bit about the Iowa State matchup and what that means for them. So that's the game that I'm probably most intrigued by, but I'll skip that for now. And I'll talk about the Big East games because while I don't expect UConn to lose at Providence, I do think, Providence is a bubble team and they're fighting for their life right now. And if they can go out there and secure a victory here, that puts them in a much, much better spot. And honestly, the same can pretty much be said for all of the teams that are hosting these games, because you got Xavier hosting Marquette, you got Villanova hosting Creighton. All 3 of those teams are fighting for their life. Xavier is probably the least likely to get in that large bid. I just don't think their resume has really held up enough to be in that spot. But I'll tell you what, you beat Marquette, even if it's a Marquette team that does not have Tyler Kolek. If you can pull off a victory there, that puts you in a much better spot. You carry some momentum with you into that NCAA or into that Big East tournament, win a few games there. Maybe Sean Miller's team can feel a little bit more comfortable or a little bit less nervous, at least on Election Sunday. Villanova didn't do themselves any favors with that loss to Seton Hall, but going out and winning at home against Creighton certainly would help put them in a much better position. Again, Providence, they're in a tough spot. I think they still are a bubble team, but it's really going to help themselves a bunch if they can find a way to beat UConn at home. I don't feel super confident that they're able to do that, but it is intriguing that we have 3 Big East. The 3 Big East ranked teams are all going on the road against teams that are fighting for a chance to get themselves more comfortably into that bubble conversation. I think while I certainly understand that all those ranked teams are favored, and some of them are probably going to be favored by quite a bit. I expect all 3 of these games to be close because those teams got nothing to lose right now.
And it's interesting with Marquette to me because obviously they've lost back-to-back games without Tyler Kolek against, interestingly enough, Creighton and UConn. But Andy, they fought really well, as we've talked about in both those games. But as you said to me earlier today, at this point in the season, there are no moral victories. And so Marquette, if I'm Shaka Smart, I'm hoping we win at Xavier, we get Tyler Kolek back for the conference tournament, and then the selection committee sees those 2 losses, how close they were even without him, and they judge it accordingly, knowing who we are with Tyler Kolek, and maybe that helps us stay in that 2-seed conversation. It's, we're not in that room, but that's the thing. The game I'm most intrigued by, that's probably the phrase I wanted to use, is Texas Tech hosting Baylor. And here's why. When you look at those Big 12 standings, right now Baylor is 3rd at 11-6, and Texas Tech is tied with Kansas in 4th at 10-7. So that's got all sorts of implications as you think about that Kansas-Houston game we just talked about, and then Baylor being a game ahead of Texas Tech. If Texas Tech can beat Baylor and get tied there, and Houston knocks off Kansas, Texas Tech's in that top 4. Andy, in the Big 12. Meanwhile, Kansas would be outside the top 4. Can you fathom that? And so, Andy, I love the implication of that Big 12 game tied with the Houston-Kansas game. So really, really intrigued by that one.
Isaac, we got 7 ranked teams who are at home. We had 9 on the road, 7 of them at home. Of course, we had the 3 ranked unranked games. Just an incredible weekend of games. I'm going to rattle off these 7 hosting ranked teams. We're going to see where we want to go from there. First, in the A10 conference, VCU on the road at number 25 Dayton, 7 Eastern time. 7 Eastern. That game is on Friday on ESPN2. Then we got in the Mountain West, Boise State going on the road to take on number 21 San Diego State. I think Boise State should have a number next to them as well, but we'll see if that changes next week. That game is at 10 Eastern time on Friday on FS1. Then going into the SEC, Arkansas at Alabama, noon on Saturday on ESPN. That's an intriguing one. Arkansas has not been good, but it's a rivalry game. We'll be interested to see what happens there. Georgia at Auburn, 13th ranked Tigers. We talked about that one already, 6:30 Eastern on Saturday on the SEC Network. Back to the Mountain West, New Mexico on the road at number 22 Utah State, 8:30 on Saturday on CBS Sports. Oklahoma State at number 20 BYU, 9 on Saturday on ESPN+. And then closing it out in the Big Ten, Wisconsin on the road at Purdue, the 3rd ranked team, 12:30 on Sunday. That game will be on Fox. Isaac, what of these games stands out to you?
Andy, it's that last one you talked about that I want to mention first. For Wisconsin, what a massive opportunity. Let's remind ourselves that the Badgers, Andy, have lost 2 straight. They've lost 7 of their last 9 basketball games. And by the way, as a reminder, they are playing at home against Rutgers on Thursday night. Again, we don't know the result of that. So it's either they are 3-7 in their last 10, or they're 2-8 in their last 10, depending on that result. Good grief. You've got to win that game, Badgers, on Thursday night. So obviously we all know the result as you're watching or listening to this. But if you could go to Purdue, to Mackey on Sunday afternoon and wrap up the regular season by knocking off the Boilermakers in what's probably going to be Zach Edey's last ever regular season home game, my goodness, how big would that be for the Badgers? Andy, they are 6th as we record in Lenardi's bracketology, but winning at Purdue, that might be a seed line bump in and of itself. We think Wisconsin's safely in as we look at things, but man, doing that would really put you over the hump. Andy, what about you? What are you looking at?
I like the New Mexico at at Utah State game here. New Mexico's a bubble team. They're fighting for their lives right now. I think they probably deserve to be in the field, but this is a really good way to cement that. You go on the road, you win at Utah State, the best team in the conference in the standings, a team that's ranked in the top 25. You go pick up that victory. You prove you can win away from the pit, which has been an issue for New Mexico. They're phenomenal at home. They struggle a little bit more on the road. That's a game that I think has really big ramifications for New Mexico, for the bubble in general, if they're able to pick it up. So that's the one I'm looking at. There's some similar things going on in the other Mountain West game. I think Boise State's more securely in the field. I don't think they desperately need to win on the road against San Diego State. It would certainly help them if they were able to do that. Neither of those teams are really bubble teams, though. We are going to get into a bunch more bubble games here momentarily, but I'm just intrigued by that matchup. Leon Rice and Brian Dutcher are two of the best coaches. I was going to say the Mountain West, but frankly in the entire country. They're both phenomenal coaches, and I think that's going to be a really close game. I was going to say fun. It's probably going to be a pretty low scoring matchup. Like, they may not total the amount of points that Kentucky's scored in half of their games this year, but I think it's still going to be a fun, close matchup.
Yeah, and I mean, that one's got all sorts of ramifications going back to that, especially the New Mexico game you mentioned, because as we record, Lunardi has New Mexico as part of his last 4 in, meaning they would be shipped off to Dayton. And the team they're playing at, Utah State, has already clinched at least a share of the Mountain West regular season championship. And so, boy, New Mexico winning on the road there, that might move them into bye status where they don't have to go to Dayton. How big would that be? So, Andy, really curious to see what happens there. I love those calls.
Well, we teased the bubble conversation, so let's get all the way into it. The bubble is about to burst for some college basketball programs. This is the weekend that might see their NCAA tournament dreams, or at least their at-large hopes, die on the vine. We're going to talk about all of those games. But first, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, LinkedIn Jobs. Folks, when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, which has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster, and they do it for free. Thankfully, LinkedIn is not just another job board. They have a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, making it the best place to hire. And LinkedIn Jobs gives you access to professionals that you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all of that while making this process both easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and they may not have time or the resources to hire. So they're constantly finding ways to make this process easier. For example, they just launched a feature to help you write your own job descriptions. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Isaac, the bubble is about to burst. We have so many. A lot of the games we've already talked about have bubble implications, like we talked about with New Mexico going on the road to Utah State. But there are a handful of games that are not between ranked teams that have significant impact this weekend regarding which teams are going to be in the field of 68. We kind of tried to give you the rooting guide. There's a handful of games that just don't really have a rooting guide. There's 2 of them here at the top where both teams are on the bubble, or both teams are kind of right outside the bubble. The first 2 games I want to talk about: Memphis at FAU in the AAC. That game is at noon on Saturday on CBS. Lunardi right now has both Memphis and FAU on the bubble. I don't think both these teams make it unless one of them wins the tournament, the AAC tournament. If South Florida wins the AAC, both the regular season and the tournament, I think that Memphis and FAU, one of them gets bumped. Right now, FAU is the favorite. If they win at home, Memphis, I think they're probably toast. So this game has some pretty significant ramifications for both those teams. Also in the SEC, we got A&M at Ole Miss, 2:00 on Saturday on CBS. To me, whoever loses this game is done. If you lose this game, you got to win the SEC tournament. I think both these teams are probably not really in the bubble conversation right now anyway. But if Ole Miss, if they lose at home, I think they're out. A&M maybe sneaks back in, whereas the reverse is kind of true as well. What do you kind of see the same situation with both those games?
Yeah,
the double bubble games.
Yeah, I love the double bubble games. But what's interesting about, in particular, the Memphis at Florida Atlantic game is that they're on completely opposite sides of said bubble, because at least, we typically go to Lunardi for this, but right now FAU is part of those last 4 buys and Memphis is part of the next 4 out. So complete opposite ends of the spectrum. But if Memphis, who's been playing a bit better, can get this win, Andy, that could go a long way towards Penny Hardaway's team, and especially because they're the road team. That's massive for them. And I just keep replaying over and over and over again 2 things. Number one, at the beginning of this season and throughout the majority of it, we would have expected this game to have an opportunity to determine the American championship. And it just doesn't. And that's still mind-boggling to me. And then the other thing is, remember that first round matchup last year where Memphis almost had it. FAU squeaked out a win, perhaps questionably so, and then rocked it all the way to the Final Four.
Well, Isaac, we got a handful of other bubble games I want to talk about here as well, with a little bit of a rooting guide. I'm going to read the matchups, read who you as a fan should be rooting for if your team is on the bubble. This is the team that you want to win because you want the other team to lose and likely put themselves in a more difficult spot in terms of making it or getting an at-large bid in the NCAA tournament. In the Big 12, we got Oklahoma at Texas, 2:00 on Saturday on ESPN. I think you're rooting for Texas. Both teams are considered in right now, but I think Oklahoma loss could potentially push them onto that bubble. Then you got in the AAC, Clemson going on the road at Wake Forest. Sorry, yes, ACC, Clemson on the road at Wake Forest. At this point, you're rooting for Clemson. A Clemson win, I think, keeps them off the bubble. It keeps them in the field. But
I wouldn't even say they're close to it. I think
I think Clemson's pretty securely in.
Yeah.
Wake Forest kind of might be out now. Like, they have not done themselves any favors with that loss to Georgia Tech. And I think if Clemson wins this one, they're more secure in the field, which is fine. And Wake Forest is less likely to get an at-large bid, which is already looking a little tenuous for them right now as it is. A couple more ACC games to get to, and then we'll look at a few others. NC State on the road at Pitt, 7:45, that weird start time because it's on the CW network on Saturday. Pitt is hanging on to a bubble spot right now, just barely. If NC State goes on the road, picks up a win here, that is very damaging for the Panthers. And then we got Georgia Tech on the road at Virginia, 8:00 on Saturday on the ACC network. Can Georgia Tech, who has done incredible against the best teams they have played this year, they're 4-1 in quad 1A games this season, can they go on the road, pick up a win at Virginia? That's a fascinating storyline. Doesn't impact their bubble hopes because they do not have any bubble hopes, but it certainly has an impact on Virginia, who is hanging on to a spot right now. If they were to lose to Georgia Tech, that would push them potentially into that last 4-in play-in territory, maybe even off the bubble entirely.
Andy, yeah, those 3 ACC games are so interesting to me. Just going back to like Lunardi's bracketology bubble stuff, Virginia is at the bottom of the last 4-in. So you know what? Get to 51 points, UVA. That's all we ask of you. Get above 50. Pitt and Wake are both in the next 4 out right now. And so not only do they need to win, but they need help from the teams ahead of them, Andy. So that's critical as well. Really interesting stuff there.
We got a couple other bubble games here to get to as well. We got Utah at Oregon. We're recording this before Utah takes on Oregon State on Thursday, also before Oregon takes on Colorado. How those games go certainly is going to have an impact on whether this is a bubble game at all. We've been kind of surprised that Utah has remained in that bubble conversation.
What are we doing?
If they lose to Oregon State on Thursday, which again, you'll know the results by the time you're listening to this, they're definitely out. If they win that game and lose to Oregon, I think they're still out. So you're rooting for the Ducks in this one. Moving over to the Big Ten, Minnesota going on the road at Northwestern. Northwestern's not listed by Lenardi on the bubble right now as we're recording this, but they did just lose to Michigan State. If they also lose to Minnesota, I think they might sneak towards that bubble conversation. Perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps they'll still be squarely in the field, but that's definitely at least a game to keep an eye on. And then in the Mountain West Conference, one of the few teams that aren't ranked, UNLV at Nevada right now, 10:30 Eastern time on Saturday on CBS Sports Network. UNLV is not a bubble team, but here's the deal. They are 10-1 in their last 11 games. This team is red hot. People are starting to talk about them, but they got 3 quad 4 losses. They're 76th in the net. Isaac, I just don't see it. I don't see it with UNLV. However, they have an incredible opportunity to play spoiler. Nevada hanging on to a bubble spot right now. This is a rivalry game on the road for UNLV. If Nevada loses at home to the Rebels, that could be a problem for their bubble hopes. Another great win for UNLV, who still at this point is going to have to run through the Mountain West tournament in order to get themselves a bid. They would be quite a bid thief, by the way, if they managed to find a way to do that.
And never forget, where is the Mountain West Tournament played? Thomas and Mack Arena, the home arena of the UNLV Runnin' Rebels. That conference tournament, to me, is the single most interesting of all of it out there. Andy, we got our 4 first tickets punched this weekend. Ohio Valley Saturday, 8 Eastern on ESPN, 2 A-Sun Sunday, 2 o'clock on ESPN. Big South Sunday, noon on ESPN, and the Missouri Valley Conference Sunday, 2 o'clock on CBS. As we record, we don't yet know the combatants in those matchups, but we can't wait for that. All right, Andy. Ooh, I can't wait. This stuff is getting wacky and wild. Going to be a super fun weekend, setting us up for Champ Week and heading into Selection Sunday. Going to be great. If you haven't yet subscribed to the Locked On College Basketball Discord community, you're missing out and you need to come. The link is in the show notes and it's free to join. If you haven't already subscribed, please do that. It's just so easy to hit the subscribe button on YouTube or audio and smash the like button if you're watching on YouTube so we know that you are here. As always, apologies to the lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats, and until Monday. Peace.